Are you seriously accusing me of stealing from us? Daniel's voice was low and controlled as he set down his glass of water with deliberate precision. I'm your husband, Melissa, not some thief in the night. I'm not accusing you of anything, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the tension building between us. I'm simply asking why our joint savings account is suddenly empty and why your mother's name is on the wire transfer. He sighed dramatically, running his hand through his dark hair. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It's a temporary arrangement. Mom needed help with her medical bills. You know how bad the insurance situation is. His tone shifted, softening into something almost patronizing. You've never worried about my family matters before? Suddenly you're concerned about helping my mother? I held his gaze across our kitchen island, morning light streaming through the windows of our Portland home, illuminating the growing distance between us. I'm concerned about the $43,000 that disappeared without a single conversation, Daniel. That's our house down payment. That's our future. His face hardened. After 6 years of marriage, I think I've earned the right to help my family in an emergency without filing paperwork with you first. If you can't trust me with something as basic as supporting my sick mother, maybe we have bigger problems. He stood abruptly, grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair. I'm late for work. We can continue this conversation about your trust issues tonight. The front door closed with a decisive click, leaving me alone with my cooling coffee and churning thoughts. My name is Melissa Winters, 34 years old, a financial advisor for a mid-size investment firm in Portland. I've built my career helping people plan for their futures, protect their assets, and make sound financial decisions. My colleagues often joke that I can spot a financial red flag from a mile away. Ironic, then, that I'd been caught so completely off guard in my own marriage. I stared at my laptop screen, the bank statement still open, showing the transfer that had emptied our savings account just 3 days ago. $43,278.15 to Margaret Thornton. My mother-in-law, a woman who had never approved of me, who had told Daniel he was marrying down when he proposed, and who had made it clear at every family gathering that she thought her son could have done better. The timestamp on the transfer showed it had happened at 2:17 a.m. While I was sleeping, my husband had been quietly moving our entire savings, money we'd been setting aside for a down payment on our first home, to his mother's account. I closed the laptop and moved to the kitchen window, watching as Daniel's car disappeared around the corner. We'd met at a friend's wedding 7 years ago. He was charming, ambitious, and shared my dreams of building a comfortable life together. We married a year later, built successful careers, and created a partnership that was supportive, if not wildly passionate. We'd decided to focus on our careers first, get financially established, buy a home, and then start a family. A plan we both seemed equally committed to. For 5 years, our marriage had functioned effectively, like a well-oiled machine, each of us playing our parts, supporting each other's goals, building toward our shared future. Until 2 months ago, when Daniel's behavior began to change in subtle but unmistakable ways. I pulled out my phone and checked our other account balances. Our checking account was untouched, as were our individual retirement accounts. Perhaps I was overreacting. Perhaps there was a reasonable explanation for this sudden financial decision. Perhaps his mother really did have unexpected medical bills that couldn't wait. My phone buzzed with a notification from our home security app, a feature I'd insisted on when we moved into this rental house in a neighborhood that was still up and coming. I opened the app to see footage from last night, captured at 12:43 a.m., Daniel in our home office, going through my personal financial documents, taking photos of statements with his phone. Something cold settled in my stomach. This was worse than I had imagined. I've always been cautious with money, a trait inherited from my father, who lost his small business during the 2008 recession. I watched my parents struggle for years afterward, their relationship strained under the weight of financial stress. Always keep some resources in your own name, my mother had advised when Daniel and I got engaged. Not because you don't trust him, but because life is unpredictable. It was advice I had taken to heart. While Daniel and I shared joint accounts, for household expenses and our home savings fund, I maintained a separate emergency account and investments. Daniel had similar arrangements, a system that had worked well for us, balancing togetherness with individual financial autonomy. Daniel's background couldn't have been more different from mine. Raised in affluence by parents who emphasized status and appearances, he'd grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle. His mother, a widow who had never worked outside the home, lived in a sprawling house in the suburbs, financially comfortable thanks to his late father's life insurance and investments. When Daniel and I first met, he was working to establish himself in commercial real estate, determined to build his own success, rather than rely on family connections. I'd always respected that independence, that drive to prove himself on his own terms. His occasional status-conscious purchases, the designer suits, the luxury watch his mother gave him for his birthday, seemed harmless enough. We could afford some indulgences, and everyone deserves small pleasures. But about 2 months ago, subtle changes began to appear in our relationship. Daniel started working later, keeping his phone face down, angling his laptop screen away from me when I entered the room. He became defensive when I asked simple questions about household expenses or upcoming bills. Then came the secret credit card I discovered accidentally while organizing tax documents, one I'd never seen before, with significant monthly payments coming from our joint checking account. "It's for work expenses," he explained dismissively when I asked. "The company reimburses me. Nothing for you to worry about." I trusted him, despite the faint alarm bells ringing in the back of my mind. After all, we'd built a life together based on mutual respect and honesty. Or so I believed. As I stood in our kitchen, staring at the security footage of my husband photographing my financial documents in the middle of the night, I realized that the $43,000 transfer wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. And I needed to find out why. I've built my career on understanding money, how it flows, how it grows, and most importantly, how it reveals people's true priorities. At Horizon Financial Partners, I specialize in helping young professionals establish healthy financial foundations. My clients appreciate my straightforward approach. I don't sugarcoat difficult truths about spending habits or unrealistic expectations. "You're our reality check," my boss had said during my last performance review. "You don't just tell clients what they want to hear. You tell them what they need to hear." It was a quality Daniel had once admired. When we first met, he'd been impressed by my financial knowledge, even asking me to review contracts for his first major commercial real estate deals. "You see things other people miss," he'd told me, eyes bright with admiration. Back then, his ambition seemed grounded, his goals aligned with mine: financial security, a home of our own, eventually a family. I'd grown up watching my parents struggle after my father's business collapsed. Their small hardware store, a fixture in our Michigan town for 20 years, couldn't compete with the big box retailers that moved in. The bankruptcy that followed took not just their livelihood, but their dignity. My father, once confident and energetic, became a shadow of himself, working a series of jobs he hated while my mother picked up extra shifts at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. "Never put all your eggs in one basket," my father would say, a bitter twist to his mouth. "And never believe anyone who says they're looking out for your interests." Despite, or perhaps because of, this background, I developed a passion for financial planning. I wanted to help people avoid the pitfalls my parents had faced, to build safeguards against life's unpredictable storms. I worked through college, earned my certification as a financial advisor, and moved to Portland for my first job, determined to build a life defined by security and careful planning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Daniel entered my life like a burst of unexpected color. We met at my college roommate's wedding in Seattle. He was a friend of the groom, seated at my table. While I was calculating how much the elaborate floral arrangements must have cost, he was charming everyone with stories about his adventures in commercial real estate. "The problem with most realtors," he said, leaning toward me with a conspiratorial smile, "is they're just glorified tour guides. They show you the property, point out the crown molding, and hand you papers to sign. I actually help my clients envision what spaces could become." His enthusiasm was infectious. When he asked for my number at the end of the evening, I surprised myself by giving it to him without hesitation. Our courtship was a whirlwind of weekend trips, elegant dinners, and long conversations about our ambitions. Daniel wanted to establish his own commercial real estate firm one day, specializing in revitalizing historic buildings. I shared my dream of eventually opening a financial education center for low-income families. We saw in each other kindred spirits, practical dreamers who understood that success required discipline and planning. His proposal came after a year of dating. "We're better together," he said, kneeling before me on the rooftop restaurant where we'd had our first date. "You keep me grounded and I help you take risks. It's the perfect partnership." I said yes without reservation, believing completely in our compatibility, in the life we would build together. The early years of our marriage had been everything I'd hoped for. We established a rhythm that honored both our shared goals and individual ambitions. We maintained separate checking accounts for personal expenses, but pooled resources for household costs and our down payment fund. We consulted each other on major purchases and celebrated each other's professional victories. The only consistent source of tension was Margaret, Daniel's mother. From our first meeting, she made it clear she found me lacking. "Daniel was always so popular with the girls from good families," she'd remarked during an early visit, her gaze drifting meaningfully to my modest engagement ring. "I'm surprised. He settled down so quickly." Daniel always defended me, but never directly confronted his mother's subtle digs. "She's from a different generation," he'd explain. "She doesn't mean anything by it." But as the years passed, I noticed how he straightened his posture when she called, how he'd check our household for imperfections before her visits, how her approval still mattered more than he cared to admit. Margaret lived alone in the sprawling Tudor home where Daniel had grown up, surrounded by antiques and painful memories. Her husband, Charles, had died when Daniel was in college, a heart attack on the golf course at age 53. Daniel rarely spoke about his father, except to say that Charles had been a complex man who had high expectations. From what I'd gathered through carefully observed family interactions, Charles Thornton had been a financially successful but emotionally distant father, quick to criticize and slow to praise. His death had left Margaret financially secure but emotionally adrift, increasingly dependent on Daniel for companionship and validation. "Family takes care of family," Margaret would say whenever she called with some household crisis. Only Daniel could solve. And Daniel would go, sometimes driving the 40 minutes to her house multiple times in a week to change light bulbs, troubleshoot computer issues, or simply listen to her complain about the neighborhood's declining standards. I tried to be understanding. Daniel was an only child, and Margaret had no other close family. But as the years passed, her demands seemed to increase rather than diminish, and Daniel's deference to her wishes began to affect our plans and priorities. 6 months ago, when we found a charming craftsman home in a neighborhood we loved, Margaret had expressed immediate disapproval. "That area? Really, Daniel? Your father would be so disappointed to see you living somewhere so ordinary." The house had been at the top of our budget, but perfect for our needs. Walking distance to good schools, a finished basement I could use as a home office, a yard where we could plant a garden. 2 days after Margaret's comments, Daniel suggested, "We keep looking." The following week, he started talking about neighborhoods with better investment potential, areas with larger homes and longer commutes, conveniently closer to Margaret's suburb. I should have recognized it then, the first significant sign that our partnership was not as equal as I'd believed. But I'd compromised, telling myself that marriage required flexibility, that finding the right home was worth taking more time. Now, staring at the empty savings account that had held our down payment, I wondered if I'd been flexible or simply blind. Before the money disappeared, I'd thought Daniel and I had built a solid foundation. Our 6-year marriage wasn't perfect. Whose is? But it functioned on mutual respect and shared goals. We'd developed routines that suited us both. Sunday morning coffee and financial planning at the kitchen table, Friday night takeout and movies, occasional weekend trips to the Oregon coast. Daniel's work in commercial real estate kept him busy with irregular hours, while my position at Horizon Financial offered more stability. We balanced each other well, his optimism softening my cautious nature, my pragmatism tempering his occasional impulsiveness. We didn't have the passionate romance depicted in movies, but we had something I valued more: reliability, comfort, and what I believed was honest communication. Our apartment, a modern 2-bedroom in Northeast Portland, was always meant to be temporary, a stepping stone while we saved for our own home. We decorated it together, compromising between Daniel's preference for sleek contemporary furnishings and my love of warmer, more traditional pieces. The result was a space that felt balanced, like our relationship. Financial transparency had always been central to our marriage. Given my profession, I naturally took the lead in organizing our finances, but major decisions were always discussed thoroughly. We maintained a detailed spreadsheet tracking our income, expenses, and savings goals. Every month, we'd review it together, celebrating milestones and adjusting strategies when needed. The down payment fund had been our pride, starting with modest contributions from our wedding gifts, growing steadily over the years through careful budgeting and occasional windfalls. Reaching the $40,000 mark last year had been cause for celebration. We'd opened a bottle of champagne and spent the evening browsing real estate listings, imagining our future home. 2 more years, Daniel had said, raising his glass in a toast. Then we find our forever home, somewhere with enough space for a family. That moment had felt like a promise, not just of a house, but of the life we would build within it. Children, holidays, Sunday dinners, a place where we would grow old together. I'd gone to sleep that night feeling completely secure in our shared vision. Our relationship with Margaret had always been the one discordant note in our otherwise harmonious life. Sunday dinners at her house were a monthly obligation that Daniel never considered skipping. These formal affairs required preparation, the right clothes, appropriate topics of conversation, and strategic avoidance of anything that might trigger her disapproval. "Daniel tells me you're still renting," she'd remarked during our last visit, arranging her silverware with precision. "At your age, Charles and I already owned our second home." "We're saving for the right property," I'd replied evenly. "The Portland market requires patience." Margaret had smiled thinly. "Patience is admirable, but at some point, one must take action. Daniel deserves a proper home." Throughout these interactions, Daniel would remain silent, his attention focused on his plate, occasionally changing the subject to safer topics. A new restaurant, a client's successful closing, neighborhood news. At home afterward, he would apologize for his mother's comments without actually addressing them. "Mom comes from a different era," he'd say. "She means well." Over time, I'd learned to let these remarks slide, saving my energy for discussions that actually moved our life forward. Margaret was a permanent fixture in our world, difficult but endurable, like Portland's rainy winters. Even with these tensions, we'd achieved a certain equilibrium, a functioning system of give and take that allowed our marriage to progress, steadily, if not always smoothly, toward our shared goals. Daniel's career was gaining momentum. He'd recently been made partner at his firm, bringing more prestigious clients and higher commissions. My own work provided solid income and satisfaction. We had a small but reliable circle of friends, weekend hiking trips, and plans for an anniversary trip to Hawaii later in the year. What I didn't see, or perhaps chose not to see, were the subtle shifts beginning to occur. Daniel working later hours, checking his phone more frequently during dinner, becoming defensive when asked about expenses, suggesting we postpone looking at houses because the market isn't right yet. These changes were so gradual that they didn't register as warning signs. When a colleague mentioned her husband had behaved similarly before she discovered his gambling addiction, I'd laughed. "Daniel's too conservative for that," I'd assured her. "He researches investments for weeks before committing a dollar." During retrospect, I should have paid more attention to the fact that Daniel had stopped participating in our monthly financial reviews, claiming he trusted my judgment completely. "You're the expert," he'd say. "Just tell me where to sign." What had seemed like a vote of confidence now looked more like a strategic retreat from accountability. The last normal day of our marriage had been a Thursday. I remember because I'd prepared Daniel's favorite dinner, pan-seared salmon with roasted vegetables, to celebrate a big commission he'd earned on a downtown office building sale. We'd eaten on the balcony, enjoying the warm June evening, discussing potential vacation spots for the following summer. "Maybe we should consider something more ambitious than Hawaii," he'd suggested. "Europe, perhaps. Mom always talks about how Dad took her to Paris for their 10th anniversary. I'd been surprised. International travel hadn't been in our near-term financial plan, but pleased by his enthusiasm. "That could be amazing," I'd agreed. "We should start researching costs." He'd smiled, reaching for my hand across the table. "Don't worry about the budget for once. Some experiences are worth the splurge." That night, we'd made love for the first time in weeks, a reconnection that had left me hopeful about our relationship, oblivious to what was already in motion. While I slept beside him, content and unsuspecting, Daniel had apparently been waiting for the right moment to transfer our savings to his mother. The next morning, everything changed. The first sign something was wrong came a week before the money disappeared. I'd stopped at the mailbox on my way up to our apartment and found an envelope addressed to Daniel from a bank we didn't use. Without thinking much of it, I'd placed it on the counter with the rest of the mail. When Daniel came home and saw the envelope, his reaction was immediate and strange. He snatched it up with unusual urgency, shoving it into his pocket. "What's that?" I'd asked casually, stirring the pasta sauce I was preparing. "Just work stuff," he'd replied too quickly. "New client setting up an escrow account." I might have believed him if not for the flush creeping up his neck. Daniel's tell since college poker games, according to his old roommate. He was lying and doing it poorly. That night, I heard him on the phone in the bathroom, speaking in hushed tones I couldn't quite make out. When I asked who he was talking to so late, he claimed it was a West Coast client considering a property that had just come on the market. "Opportunity doesn't wait for business hours," he'd said with a forced laugh. 3 days later, his laptop pinged while he was in the shower. Glancing over, I saw an email notification preview from Margaret. Transfer arrangement. Will call. Tomorrow to discuss details." My stomach tightened, but I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Transfer could refer to anything. Perhaps she was moving investments between accounts and wanted Daniel's advice. He'd helped her manage her finances since his father's death, a responsibility he took seriously. When Daniel emerged from the bathroom, I mentioned the email casually. "Your mom sent something about a transfer arrangement. Is she moving money around again?" His response was immediate defensiveness. "Were you checking my emails?" he demanded, closing the laptop with more force than necessary. "Of course not," I replied, surprised by his tone. "The notification popped up while you were showering. I happened to see it." "Well, it's nothing important," he said, visibly relaxing. Just some estate planning stuff Mom's working on with her attorney. She wants my input. I nodded, accepting the explanation despite the lingering unease. Daniel had always been slightly protective of his relationship with Margaret, handling her affairs without much discussion with me. It wasn't ideal, but it was our normal. The next day, Daniel suggested we open separate credit cards to maximize our reward points. The timing struck me as odd. We'd just had our monthly financial review 2 weeks earlier and had decided our current credit setup was working well. Different cards earn higher percentages on different categories, he explained, showing me research. He'd apparently done. You can get the one with cash back on groceries and utilities, and I'll take the travel points card for gas and dining out. The logic seemed reasonable, and I agreed, though something about his eagerness nagged at me. Daniel had never shown much interest in optimizing reward points before. 5 days before the transfer, Daniel began bringing up his mother's health in casual conversation, something he rarely did. Mom's arthritis is really flaring up, he mentioned. Over breakfast. She's having trouble with the stairs in her house. Later that week. Mom's insurance is giving her trouble about covering her new medication. Can you believe they denied the claim twice? And then, I'm worried about Mom. The doctor wants her to see a specialist, but there's a waiting list. Each comment was dropped casually into conversation, none suggesting any immediate crisis, but creating a consistent theme. Margaret had health problems, and her insurance wasn't adequate. 3 days before the transfer, I came home early from work with a migraine to find Daniel on the phone in our home office, the door partially closed, unusual for him. Need to move quickly on this, I heard him say. The opportunity won't last long. Yes, I know it's a lot of money, but the return will be worth it. Trust me on this. When he noticed me in the hallway, he ended the call abruptly. Hey, you're home early, he said, slipping the phone into his pocket. Migraine, I explained, my suspicion momentarily overridden by throbbing pain. Who was that? Just a potential investor for the Riverside property, he said, guiding me toward our bedroom. Let me get you your medication and an ice pack. I wanted to press further, but the pain made coherent thought difficult. As he tucked a blanket around me and closed the blinds, I remember thinking how attentive he was being, more so than usual. Now I realize he was distracting me from asking more questions. The night before the transfer, Daniel suggested we update our passwords on all our accounts as a security precaution. One of my clients had their identity stolen, he explained. Made me realize we should be more careful. Together, we sat at the kitchen table changing passwords for our utilities, streaming services, and email accounts. When we got to our banking apps, Daniel offered to handle them. You've had that migraine all day, he said. Let me take care of these. What do you want the new passwords to be? Touched by his thoughtfulness and still foggy from migraine medication, I suggested a new password convention and watched as he updated the accounts on his phone, narrating what he was doing. I assumed he was changing both our individual and joint accounts to the new scheme we'd discussed. That night, I slept deeply, aided by my medication. According to our security camera footage that I would review days later, Daniel stayed up until nearly 3 a.m., sitting at our kitchen table with his laptop open, making phone calls in hushed tones, and repeatedly checking his watch. The next morning, Daniel was up before me, brewing coffee and suggesting I take the day off work. You're still pale, he said, bringing me a cup. One more day of rest won't hurt. I've already called Janet to let her know you might not be in. Janet was my assistant at Horizon Financial, and Daniel had never called my workplace before. The unexpectedness of the gesture distracted me from questioning why he was encouraging me to stay home when he'd already made the call on my behalf. I've got back-to-back meetings today, he added, kissing my forehead. Don't wait up tonight. The developer from Seattle wants to discuss the proposal over dinner. He left earlier than usual, and I drifted back to sleep, waking around noon feeling much better. I made myself lunch and decided to pay the monthly bills since I had unexpected free time. That's when I discovered our savings account had been completely emptied. The transaction details showed a wire transfer to Margaret Thornton, processed, at 2:17 a.m. for the full balance of $43,278.15. I stared at the screen in disbelief, my mind spinning through possible explanations. A banking error, identity theft, a website glitch. But the transaction details were clear, authorized by Daniel Thornton, confirmed through the two-factor authentication sent to his phone. My husband had emptied our savings account in the middle of the night and sent every penny to his mother, my B. First instinct was to call Daniel immediately, but something held me back. The careful preparation, changing passwords, encouraging me to stay home, creating a narrative about his mother's health problems, suggested this wasn't a spontaneous decision. He'd planned this methodically, creating a perfect opportunity to transfer the money without my knowledge or interference. If I confronted him now, I'd get the practiced explanation he'd already prepared. I needed more information before that conversation happened. I took a deep breath and approached the situation like I would advise one of my clients, systematically and without emotional reaction. First, I needed to understand the full extent of the financial changes. I began checking all our accounts, starting with my personal checking and savings. Both were untouched, their modest balances intact. My retirement accounts and investments showed no unusual activity. Next, I examined our joint checking account, which we used for regular household expenses. The balance was lower than expected. With several unfamiliar transactions over the past month, $200 to Portland Executive Car Service, $3,700 to Cartier, $890 to the Heathman Hotel. None of these aligned with our usual spending patterns or anything Daniel had mentioned. We rarely used car services, preferring ride shares when needed. The Heathman was an upscale hotel in downtown Portland. Why would Daniel need a hotel room in the same city where we lived? And Cartier, the luxury jeweler, was completely out of character for us. I checked his personal accounts, which were linked to mine for visibility, though we maintained separate control. His checking account showed multiple large cash withdrawals over the past 3 weeks, $500 here, $700 there, totaling nearly $4,000. His saving account, which typically held a steady emergency fund of around $10,000, was down to just $1,720. The pattern was unmistakable. Daniel had been systematically moving money out of accounts I would notice immediately, and now had finally emptied our largest joint asset, the down payment fund. My hands trembled slightly. As I opened our shared password manager to check if other financial accounts had been compromised, that's when I discovered another disturbing change. Daniel had created a new email address 3 weeks ago that I'd never seen before, daniel.thornton78@privateemail.com, and had set up accounts at 2 different banks using this email. I sat, back in my chair, trying to process what this meant. This wasn't an impulsive decision to help his mother with medical bills. This was calculated financial infidelity, planned and executed with deliberate secrecy. But why? What was happening that would drive Daniel to betray our partnership this way? I pulled out my phone and called Margaret directly, something I rarely did. If she truly had medical issues serious enough to require our entire savings, I needed to understand the situation. The call went to voicemail after 6 rings. I left a deliberately casual message. "Hi, Margaret, it's Melissa. Just checking in to see how you're feeling. Daniel mentioned some health concerns, and I wanted to see if there's anything I can do to help. Give me a call when you have a chance." Next, I called Daniel's office and asked for him, identifying myself as his wife. The receptionist's response was immediate and bewildering. "Oh, Mr. Thornton is out today. He took a personal day." "A personal day?" He'd told me he had back-to-back meetings and dinner with a Seattle developer. Another lie. My unease deepening. I did something I'd never done before. I checked our cell phone records online. Daniel and I shared a family plan, which gave me access to his call and text history, though not the content of messages. What I found was a series of frequent calls to and from the same number over the past 2 months, often late at night or early morning. Some calls lasted over an hour. The number wasn't saved in my contacts. When I ran it through a reverse lookup service, it came back registered to a Cameron Reynolds in Portland. The name meant nothing to me. A quick social media search revealed a Cameron Reynolds who worked at Daniel's real estate firm, a new associate, who had joined about 4 months ago, according to the company website. Her profile picture showed a striking woman in her late 20s with auburn hair and a confident smile. I sat staring at her photo, an uncomfortable possibility forming in my mind. The car service, the hotel, the Cartier purchase, the long late-night calls. Was Daniel having an affair? But that didn't explain the money transfer to his mother. If he was planning to leave me for Cameron, why send our savings to Margaret? None of it made sense yet. I needed more information. I remembered the home security system I'd insisted on installing when we moved in. Daniel had complained about the expense, but finally agreed after a break-in at a neighboring apartment. The system included motion-activated cameras in the main living areas and recorded footage to cloud storage for 30 days. I logged into the security app and began reviewing footage from the past week, focusing on times when I was at work or asleep. Most showed normal household routines, but the footage from the previous night was revealing. After I'd gone to bed, Daniel had spent hours at the kitchen table with paperwork spread out before him, making calls and working on his laptop. At 12:43 a.m., he'd gone into our home office and photographed documents from my desk drawer, the drawer where I kept personal financial statements and account information. The next clip, time-stamped 2:14 a.m., showed him back at the kitchen table, phone in hand, apparently waiting for something. At 2:17 a.m., the exact time of the wire transfer, he looked at his phone, typed something, then nodded with what appeared to be satisfaction. He gathered the papers, closed his laptop, and moved out of the camera's view. I felt physically ill. Watching this footage, the calculated nature of his actions, the deliberate violation of our trust, all while I slept unaware in the next room. I spent the next hour creating a detailed timeline of everything I'd discovered, documenting account changes, unusual transactions, and Daniel's pattern of deception. I took screenshots of the security footage, saved copies of bank statements, and compiled all the evidence in a secure folder. By mid-afternoon, I had a clearer picture of what had happened, if not why. Daniel had been systematically moving money around for weeks, creating separate accounts, and finally emptying our savings. He'd lied about his whereabouts today and had been in regular contact with a female colleague. And somehow, his mother was involved. I was still piecing it all together when my phone rang. It was Margaret. "Melissa, dear," she said, her voice dripping with its usual condescension. "I got your message. No need to worry about my health. I'm absolutely fine." Margaret's response confirmed what I'd already begun to suspect. The story about her health problems had been fabricated. "That's strange," I replied carefully. "Daniel's been quite concerned about your arthritis and insurance issues." A slight pause. "Oh, that. Just the usual aches and pains at my age. Nothing serious. Daniel always exaggerates when it comes to my health." "I see," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Has he visited you recently?" "Not in the past week or so," Margaret answered. "He's been so busy with that new development project. The one in... what? Was it Beaverton?" Daniel had no projects in Beaverton. Another piece that didn't fit. "Of course," I said. "Well, I'm glad you're doing well. I should let you go. I know you have your bridge club on Thursdays." "Actually, I'm not at home right now," Margaret said, a note of pride entering her voice. "I'm at the Continental waiting for my lunch reservation. They have the most wonderful new chef from San Francisco." The Continental was Portland's most expensive restaurant, where entrees started at $50. Not the kind of place someone with pressing medical bills would choose for a casual Thursday lunch. "Enjoy your meal," I said, ending the call with, my mind racing. Margaret clearly wasn't facing a health crisis, wasn't experiencing insurance problems, and apparently had no idea why Daniel had transferred our savings to her account. Or was she lying too? I needed professional advice. I called my colleague Samantha, who specialized in financial fraud cases. After swearing her to confidentiality, I explained the situation. "This is concerning Mel," she said gravely. "The pattern looks like what we call financial flight, systematically moving assets before a planned exit. The transfer to his mother could be a way to park the money somewhere he can access it later without it being directly tied to him." "You think he's planning to leave me?" The words felt strange in my mouth, clinical and distant, as though we were discussing someone else's marriage. I can't say for certain, but the behaviors are consistent with someone preparing for a major life change. The separate accounts, the cash withdrawals, the secretive communications. These are red flags. "What should I do?" I asked, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. "Document everything. Secure your personal assets. And consider consulting an attorney, just to understand your options. Don't confront him until you've protected yourself." Following Samantha's advice, I called a law firm specializing in family law and scheduled a consultation for the following day. Then I began securing my personal finances, changing passwords on my individual accounts, removing Daniel's access to my credit card information, and transferring my latest paycheck from our joint checking account to my personal account. Next, I needed to understand the connection to Cameron Reynolds. A quick LinkedIn search showed she had joined Daniel's firm 4 months ago as a senior investment specialist, the same title Daniel held. Her profile listed previous experience at real estate firms in Seattle and Los Angeles, with an MBA from USC. Professional credentials aside, what was her relationship with my husband? I debated my next move carefully. Direct surveillance felt extreme, but I needed answers before confronting Daniel. Finally, I decided on a compromise. I would drive by the Heathman Hotel, where Daniel had spent $890 recently, and then past his office. Not to spy exactly, but to see if his car was at either location, especially since he'd claimed to be in meetings all day. I changed quickly, grabbed my keys, and headed downtown. The Heathman's valet parking area was visible from the street. I drove past slowly, scanning the vehicles, and felt a jolt of recognition. Daniel's black Audi was parked prominently near the entrance. My husband, who had claimed to be in back-to-back meetings followed by dinner with a Seattle developer, was at an upscale hotel in the middle of the afternoon on a personal day from work. I parked down the street and sat in my car, trying to decide what to do next. Confronting him at the hotel seemed melodramatic and potentially humiliating. Yet driving home to wait for his eventual return felt unbearable. As I sat deliberating, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Thornton, this is Cameron Reynolds from Portland Premier Properties. I'm trying to reach Daniel, but his phone is going straight to voicemail. We have an urgent situation with the Riverside client. Could you ask him to call me when you see him?" The timing was so unexpected I nearly laughed. Cameron, the woman I'd suspected might be having an affair with my husband, was trying to reach him through me. Either she was exceptionally brazen, or there was another explanation for those late-night calls. I decided to use the opportunity to gather more information. I called the number immediately. "Cameron Reynolds," she answered professionally. "Hi, Cameron. This is Melissa Thornton returning your call about Daniel." "Oh, thank you." She sounded genuinely relieved. "We have a situation with the Riverside commercial property. The buyers are threatening to walk if we can't resolve a zoning issue by close of business today." "I understand," I said. "But Daniel took a personal day today." He mentioned something about meetings in Seattle. I watched carefully for her reaction. Seattle? Cameron sounded confused. No, that meeting is next week. He specifically told me he was taking today off to deal with family matters. That's why I tried calling you. My suspicions shifted again. Daniel had lied to both of us about his whereabouts. I haven't seen him since this morning, I said truthfully. But I can try reaching him. Has he been difficult to contact recently? Cameron hesitated. Well, yes. The past few weeks he's been somewhat inconsistent. Missing client calls, rescheduling meetings last minute. It's not like him. The partners are starting to notice. I see. When did you last speak with him? Yesterday afternoon. We were discussing the Riverside property, and he seemed distracted. He mentioned something about his mother needing financial assistance and having to move some things around. So, he'd used the same story at work, Margaret needing money, to explain his unusual behavior. The pieces were starting to align, though the complete picture remained elusive. If I reach him, I'll have him call you, I promised. And Cameron, thank you for your discretion. Daniel's been under a lot of pressure lately. This last part was a calculated gamble. People often reveal more when they think they're being taken into confidence. Of course, she replied sympathetically. We all go through tough times. I just hope he resolves whatever's going on with his family. The firm really values his work. The call ended, leaving me with the distinct impression that Cameron Reynolds was not having an affair with my husband. Her confusion about his whereabouts seemed genuine, and her professional concern didn't suggest romantic entanglement. So if Daniel wasn't with Cameron, who was he with at the Heathman? And why had he transferred our entire savings to his mother? Needed to see exactly what Daniel was doing at that hotel. I sat in my car, watching the Heathman's entrance, feeling simultaneously ridiculous and justified. This wasn't me. I'd never been the jealous, suspicious type who followed her husband or checked his phone. Yet here I was, parked half a block away, monitoring the comings and goings at a luxury hotel where my husband was doing something. After 20 minutes of internal debate, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Daniel at the hotel. That would only lead to a scene and potentially compromise my position. Instead, I would gather more information directly from the source. I smoothed my hair, applied fresh lipstick, and walked confidently into the Heathman's elegant lobby. The concierge greeted me with a professional smile. Good afternoon, ma'am. How may I assist you? I'm meeting my husband for coffee, I said, projecting casual certainty. Daniel Thornton? I believe he's in a meeting here. The concierge checked his computer. Ah, yes, Mr. Thornton. He's in the Wellington suite. Would you like me to call up? No need, I said quickly. I'll surprise him. We're celebrating our anniversary today. Congratulations, the concierge smiled. The Wellington suite is on the 4th floor, end of the hallway to your right when you exit the elevator. My heart pounded as I rode the elevator, questioning my decisions with every floor we passed. What if Daniel was with another woman? Was I prepared to see that? But I needed to know what was happening. Needed to understand why our savings had vanished and why my husband had been lying to me for weeks. The Wellington suite had an ornate wooden door with a discreet plaque. I hesitated, then knocked firmly. After a moment, the door opened to reveal not Daniel, but a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, his expression shifting from expectation to confusion. Can I help you? He asked, partially blocking the doorway. Beyond him, I could see a conference table where several people sat, including Daniel. There were papers spread across the table, laptops open, and a presentation displayed on a large screen. This wasn't a romantic rendezvous. It was a business meeting. I'm sorry to interrupt, I said, recovering quickly. I'm looking for Daniel Thornton? Daniel's head snapped up at the sound of my voice, his expression flickering from shock to something that looked remarkably like fear before settling into forced casualness. Melissa, he said, standing and coming to the door. What are you doing here? The man in the doorway looked between us. Your wife? Yes, Daniel confirmed reluctantly. Jim, this is Melissa. Melissa, this is Jim Harker. The name hit me like a physical blow. Jim Harker was the owner of Cascade Development Group, one of the largest commercial real estate developers in the Pacific Northwest, and a direct competitor to Daniel's firm. A pleasure, Jim said, extending his hand, which I shook automatically. Why don't you join us? We're almost finished here. I wouldn't want to intrude, I began, but Jim waved away my objection. Nonsense. We're discussing your husband's future. After all, you should be part of this conversation. Daniel's face had gone pale, but he forced a smile. Sure, why not? His tone was light, but his eyes were pleading, whether for understanding or silence I couldn't tell. I entered the suite, taking in the scene more fully. There were 5 people around the table: Jim, Daniel, a younger man taking notes on a tablet, and 2 professionally dressed women with Cascade Development business cards placed in front of them. Jim gestured to an empty chair. We were just reviewing the compensation package, he said as I sat down. Your husband is being quite thorough in his negotiations. Daniel sat stiffly beside me. Melissa, I can explain all this later. Daniel has tremendous potential, Jim continued, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the tension. We've been trying to get him to join Cascade for years. His understanding of the Portland commercial market is unparalleled. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. This wasn't about an affair. This was about a job change, a major career move that Daniel had kept completely secret from me. I see, I said carefully. And when would this new position begin? One of the women, her nameplate identified her as Elaine Barnes, HR director, consulted her notes. We're hoping Daniel can start in 2 weeks. The Seattle office is eager to have him on board before the Princeton development breaks ground. Seattle office? I repeated, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. A heavy silence fell over the room as everyone realized simultaneously that I had been completely in the dark about this entire situation. Jim cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a short break. Daniel, why don't you and your wife use the terrace for a few minutes? We can reconvene at 3. Daniel nodded stiffly, avoiding my gaze as he stood and led the way to the suite's private terrace overlooking the city. Once the glass door closed behind us, he turned to me, his expression a mix of anger and defensiveness. What are you doing here, Melissa? How did you even find me? That's your question right now? I asked incredulously. Not, why did I empty our savings account without telling you? Or, why have I been lying about a job in Seattle? He ran a hand through his hair, agitation evident in every movement. It's complicated. I was going to tell you everything tonight. I had it all planned out. Planned out like the wire transfer to your mother at 2 a.m? Or planned out like the lies about her health problems? Daniel's eyes widened. You know about the transfer. I know everything, Daniel. I know about the secret bank accounts, the cash withdrawals, the lies about your whereabouts. What I don't know is why. Why empty our savings? Why lie? And what does your mother have to do with all this? He leaned against the terrace railing, suddenly looking exhausted. Cascade made me an offer I couldn't refuse. Executive Vice President of Acquisitions based in Seattle. Triple my current salary, stock options, performance bonuses. And you couldn't discuss this with me, your wife, the person you're supposedly building a life with? I knew you'd try to talk me out of it, he said, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. You're always so cautious, so focused on the safe option. This is a risk, yes, but it's the opportunity of a lifetime. That doesn't explain why you transferred our house savings to your mother. Daniel looked away, his jaw tightening. The position requires a significant buy-in. All executive VPs have to purchase partnership shares. It shows commitment to the company's future. The minimum investment is $50,000. I stared. At him, the final pieces falling into place. So you took our savings for a buy-in to a job you never discussed with me that would require us to move to Seattle, which you also never mentioned, and you gave the money to your mother because I needed to move it somewhere temporarily where you wouldn't notice it missing right away, he admitted. I was going to tell you everything tonight, show you the offer letter, explain the opportunity. Once you understood the potential, we could move the money from Mom's account to Cascade. And if I didn't agree? If I didn't want to move to Seattle or spend our house savings on your career gamble? His silence was answer enough. You were going to do it anyway, I said softly. You never intended this to be a discussion. It was always going to be a fait accompli. Present me with the done deal and expect me to fall in line. That's not fair, Daniel protested. This benefits both of us. The salary alone would let us buy a house twice the size of what we've been looking at in Portland, in Seattle, away from my job, my friends, the life we've built. I felt strangely calm, considering the magnitude of what I was learning. Why all the secrecy, Daniel? The late-night calls? The lies about your mother's health? He looked genuinely confused. What late-night calls? To Cameron Reynolds. Recognition dawned on his face. She's been helping me prepare for the interviews with Cascade. She used to work for Jim's company in Seattle. She's been coaching me, introducing me to the right people. Another piece of the puzzle snapped into place. Cameron wasn't a mistress. She was a career mentor and possibly co-conspirator in Daniel's secret professional ambitions. And the Cartier purchase? The hotel charges? A gift for my mother as a thank you for helping with the money transfer. And these hotel meetings, Cascade wanted discretion since I'm still working for a competitor. Everything had an explanation, yet nothing was truly explained. Daniel hadn't been having an affair. He'd been orchestrating a complete upheaval of our lives without my knowledge or consent. You went through all this elaborate deception, lying to me for months, hiding career plans, secretly moving our money, because you thought I'd say no? I asked, trying to understand the magnitude of his betrayal. I did it because this is what's best for us, Daniel insisted. You're so risk-averse you can't see the bigger picture. Sometimes you have to take chances to get ahead. As I looked at my husband, this person I thought I knew completely, I realized we were having two entirely different conversations. To him, this was about opportunity and ambition. To me, it was about trust and partnership. The money has to be transferred to Cascade by tomorrow, Daniel continued, apparently believing he was winning me over. The paperwork is ready. Once it's done, we can start planning the move. Mom's already looking at neighborhoods in Seattle for us. The casual mention of his mother's involvement was the final revelation. Your mother knew about all of this? About the job, the move, everything? Daniel nodded, not seeing the significance. Of course, she's been incredibly supportive. She even offered to help with the down payment on a new place in Seattle. Of course she had. Margaret had known about her son's career move before his wife did. Had probably encouraged the secrecy, knowing I might object. Had helped him hide our money and plan a future I'd had no say in. In that moment, I made a decision. I need to go, I said quietly. Go? We're in the middle of finalizing everything. You can join us for the rest of the meeting. No, Daniel. I need to go home. You finish your meeting. We'll talk later. His relief was palpable. Thank you for understanding. I promise, once you see the numbers, you'll realize why I did this. But as I left the Wellington suite, numbers were the furthest thing from my mind. I wasn't headed home to wait for Daniel's explanation. I was going to pack. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing through implications and options. By the time I reached our apartment, I'd moved beyond shock to something more focused, a cold clarity that felt both foreign and necessary. Daniel had made unilateral decisions that affected our entire future. He'd lied repeatedly, manipulated me, and conspired with his mother to hide our savings. The betrayal wasn't sexual, but in some ways felt more fundamental. A complete dismissal of my agency in our partnership. Inside our apartment, I moved with purpose. First, I called my boss at Horizon Financial. Janet, I need to take emergency personal leave starting immediately. Family crisis. My voice sounded steady, professional, belying the turmoil beneath. Of course, Melissa. Take whatever time you need. Is there anything I can do? Actually, yes. Could you discreetly look into any positions that might be opening up at the Seattle office? Just exploratory at this point. I wasn't sure yet what my next steps would be, but information gathering was never wasted effort. If Daniel was determined to move to Seattle, I needed to understand my own options there and everywhere else. Next, I called my attorney friend, Claire, who specialized in family law. Can you meet today? It's urgent. I explained the situation in brief, clinical terms. Come to my office at 5, she said without hesitation. And Melissa, bring copies of all your financial records, everything you have access to. With those immediate calls handled, I turned to practical matters. I pulled out 2 suitcases and began packing methodically. Essential clothing, important documents, irreplaceable personal items. Not everything. This wasn't a permanent exit yet, but enough to give me space and options. As I worked, I made another call to my bank. I explained that I needed to open a new account immediately, one that would be completely separate from any existing accounts linked to my husband. The customer service representative walked me through the process, and within 20 minutes, I had a new account established under my maiden name, with funds transferred from my personal savings. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was now engaging in the same secretive financial behavior I'd condemned in Daniel. But my actions were defensive, not deceptive. I wasn't hiding money to pursue a unilateral agenda. I was protecting myself while I assessed the damage to our relationship. The security camera footage from the night before still bothered me. I pulled it up again, watching Daniel's careful movements as he photographed my documents. There was something deliberate about his actions that suggested he'd been planning this for longer than just a few weeks. I began searching through our digital records, looking for earlier signs I might have missed. In his cloud storage account, which was linked to our shared family plan, I found a folder titled Cascade Opportunity, dating back nearly 6 months. Inside were email exchanges with Jim Harker, preliminary offer letters, research on Seattle real estate, and, most disturbingly, a detailed timeline labeled Transition Plan. The document outlined every step of Daniel's strategy, from initial meetings with Cascade to the final relocation to Seattle. What shocked me wasn't just the comprehensive planning, but the calculated approach to managing me. Phase 3. Financial preparation, gradually increase personal cash reserves, secure temporary holding account for down payment funds, mother's account. Ideal, low visibility. Begin researching Seattle housing market, introduce M to idea of potential career growth requiring flexibility. He'd planned every aspect of this upheaval, reducing me to an initial M, a component to be managed rather than a partner to be consulted. Further down, the timeline became even more explicit. Phase 5. Transition announcement. Present complete package to M. Offer letter, compensation details, Seattle housing options. Emphasize financial benefits and career growth position as decision already made. But with benefits for both parties, be prepared for initial resistance. Counter with concrete numbers if necessary, invoke family support. Mother has agreed to help with persuasion. The document confirmed what I'd already intuited. Daniel had never intended to include me in this decision. His plan had always been to present me with a fait accompli, expecting that financial incentives would overcome any objections to having my life upended without consultation. Most telling was the final note on the document. Remember, easier to ask forgiveness than permission. Once transfer is complete and position secured, resistance becomes moot. I sat back, oddly calm despite the magnitude of what I'd discovered. This wasn't an impulsive decision or a panicked reaction to a career opportunity. This was a comprehensive deception, planned over months, with my husband and his mother as co-conspirators. I downloaded everything to a secure drive, then continued packing with renewed purpose. By 4 o'clock, I had completed the most essential preparations. My important documents were secured, key possessions packed, and financial safeguards established. I made one final call before heading to meet Claire, to a locksmith service that advertised same-day emergency appointments. "I need the locks changed at my apartment today. How soon can you be there?" The dispatcher promised someone by 6 o'clock. I gave them the address and authorized the premium rate for evening service. At Claire's office, I laid out everything I'd discovered: the transferred savings, the secret job negotiations, the detailed deception timeline. "He's not having an affair," I concluded. "He's just systematically excluded me from every major decision about our future while collaborating with his mother to hide our savings." Claire listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When I finished, she looked up with professional directness. "You have several options here, Melissa. This isn't necessarily grounds for divorce unless you want it to be, but it absolutely justifies the protective measures you've already taken." "I don't know if I want a divorce," I admitted. "I do know I can't continue in a marriage where I'm treated as an obstacle to be managed, rather than a partner to be consulted." "Then your next steps depend on what outcome you want," Claire said pragmatically. "If you're seeking to salvage the relationship, you'll need couples counseling with clear conditions for moving forward. If you're leaning toward separation, we should discuss a formal legal arrangement. And if divorce seems likely, there are preparations we should make immediately. What I want right now is time and space to decide without pressure or manipulation," I said. "Is changing the locks too extreme?" Claire considered this. "Legally, it's complicated since you're both on the lease. But given the financial manipulation you've documented, it's not unreasonable to secure your living space temporarily. Just be prepared for his reaction." "And the money? Can we get it back from his mother's account?" "Potentially. The fact that it came from a joint account and was transferred without your knowledge gives us leverage. I can draft a formal demand letter tonight. Often, the threat of legal action is enough in these situations." As our meeting concluded, Claire handed me her card with her personal cell number written on the back. "Call any time, day or night. And Melissa, document everything from this point forward. Every conversation, every text, every email. Evidence matters." I left her office feeling strangely empowered. The shock and betrayal remained, but they were now accompanied by something else: a steely determination to protect myself and reclaim my agency. The locksmith was finishing up when I arrived. Home, he demonstrated the new keys, handed me the invoice, and departed with professional efficiency. Inside, I looked around the apartment we'd shared for 4 years. The furniture we'd chosen together, the photographs of happier times, the accumulated evidence of a partnership I'd believed in completely. Everything looked the same, yet everything had changed. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen counter, waiting. Daniel would be home soon, probably flush with excitement about finalizing his deal with Cascade, ready to present me with his vision for our future, a vision he'd never bothered to discuss with me. He would find the door locks changed, his access restricted, and his wife no longer the manageable component he'd factored into his plans. I checked the time. Any minute now. At 7:42 p.m., my phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. "I'm outside our apartment," he said when I answered, his voice a mixture of confusion and irritation. "My key doesn't work." "I know," I replied calmly. "I had the locks changed." A stunned silence then. "You what? Why would you?" He stopped abruptly. "Is this about the meeting today? Melissa, If you'd just let me explain the opportunity. This isn't about the opportunity, Daniel. It's about trust. It's about partnership. It's about 6 months of calculated deception. Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its confident edge. Can I come in? We need to talk about this. I considered refusing, making him feel the powerlessness I'd experienced upon discovering our emptied savings. But that would be retaliatory, not productive. I'll let you in. But this conversation happens on my terms. I walked to the door and opened it. Daniel stood in the hallway, his expression cycling rapidly through shock, anger, and calculation as he took in my calm demeanor. "What's going on?" he demanded, stepping inside. His eyes widened as he noticed the packed suitcases by the door. "You're leaving? Over a job opportunity?" "I haven't decided what I'm doing yet," I said evenly. "But I am creating options for myself. Something you've been doing secretly for half a year." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "This is completely disproportionate. Yes, I should have told you about the Cascade position sooner, but changing locks? Packing bags? I found your timeline," I interrupted. His face froze. "What timeline?" "The one in your cloud storage. Transition plan. I believe you. Called it. With its detailed phases for managing me, positioning the decision as already made, and using your mother to help with persuasion. That timeline." The color drained from Daniel's face as he realized the extent of what I'd discovered. He moved to the couch and sank down, defensive posture evaporating. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said finally, clearly. Just like I wasn't supposed to notice our savings disappearing until you'd secured your partnership buy-in. "Tell me, was your mother always part of this plan? Or did you recruit her later?" Daniel looked up sharply. "Leave my mother out of this." "I'd love to," I countered. "But you brought her in when you transferred our house down payment to her account in the middle of the night. When exactly were you planning to get that money back, by the way?" "Tomorrow," he said quickly. "After I finalized everything with Cascade. The money was just there temporarily, like I told you." "And if I'd refused to let you use our savings for your buy-in? What was Plan B?" Daniel's hesitation told me everything. There had been no Plan B because he'd never considered my refusal a serious possibility. In his mind, I was manageable, a hurdle to navigate, not a partner to consult. "I need to know something," I said after the silence stretched uncomfortably. "When did this start? When did you begin seeing me as someone to be managed rather than someone to be partnered with?" His eyes couldn't meet mine. "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that. Your own planning document makes it abundantly clear." Daniel stood abruptly and paced to the window, his back to me. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under. This opportunity with Cascade, it's the kind that comes once in a career. If I'd turned it down, I'd have been stuck at Portland Premier forever, hitting the same ceiling, making the same money. I understand ambition, Daniel. What I don't understand is deception. You could have talked to me. We could have made plans together." He turned, expression hardening. "Would you have agreed to use our house savings for the buy-in? Be honest." I considered the question seriously. "I don't know. I might have if the opportunity was truly as exceptional as you claim, but I deserve the chance to be part of that decision. See? You don't even know if you'd have supported me." He latched onto this perceived victory. "That's exactly why I had to secure everything first. You've always been so cautious, so risk-averse. Sometimes big rewards require big risks." "This wasn't about risk tolerance," I said quietly. "This was about control. You didn't just make a financial decision without me. You orchestrated an entire life change without my input. New job, new city, new future, all planned with your mother's involvement but not your wife's." At the mention of Margaret again, something in Daniel's expression shifted. A flash of guilt, quickly suppressed. "What aren't you telling me about? Your mother's role in this?" I asked, suddenly certain there was more to discover. Daniel returned to the couch, sitting heavily. For a long moment, he said nothing, apparently weighing his options. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its defensive edge. Mom remortgaged her house 6 months ago. She needed cash for some investments that didn't pan out. She's been struggling financially but was too proud to tell me directly. I stared at him, processing this new information. Your mother has money problems? But she's always so flashy, status conscious, judgmental about other people's finances? Daniel laughed bitterly. It's all facade. Dad left her comfortable but not wealthy. She's been living beyond her means for years, trying to maintain appearances. And what does this have to do with our savings? Daniel looked away. Part of our money was going to help her refinance. The partnership buy-in is $40,000, not $50,000. The extra was for Mom. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Daniel planned to use our house savings for his career move without consulting me, but he'd also intended to give $10,000 to his mother, money we'd saved together for our future. Does Jim Harker know you're using part of your investment to bail out your mother? I asked. Daniel's face flushed. Of course not. The transfer to Cascade would come directly from Mom's account. $40,000 for the partnership. The rest stays with her. So you were lying to your new employers too, I noted, beginning your executive career with financial deception. Very promising. It's not like that, he insisted. It's just creative problem solving. Mom needs help. I need the partnership shares. This arrangement solves both problems, while creating an enormous one in your marriage, I added. Did that factor into your creative problem-solving at all? I was going to make it up to you, Daniel said, leaning forward earnestly. The position at Cascade comes with a substantial signing bonus. We could still buy a house in Seattle, a better one than we could afford here. That's not the point. I stood, frustration finally breaking through my composed facade. This isn't about the money itself. It's about the systematic deception. It's about you and your mother making plans for our future without including me. It's about you viewing me as an obstacle rather than a partner. Daniel stood too, his own frustration evident. What do you want from me, Melissa? I've explained everything. Yes, I should have been more transparent. But the opportunity is real. The money will be returned and our future will be better for it. Can't we move forward? I looked at my husband, this person I'd believed I knew completely, and felt a profound disconnect. He still didn't understand. In his mind, this was a simple case of ends justifying means, a temporary deception for long-term benefit. He couldn't see the fundamental breach of trust, the complete disregard for my agency in our partnership. The money isn't coming back tomorrow, Daniel, I said quietly. His expression shifted to alarm. What do you mean? I mean, I've already been in contact with a lawyer. The funds were transferred without my knowledge or consent from a joint account. We're demanding its immediate return, and if your mother doesn't comply, we'll pursue legal action. You can't be serious, he said, voice rising. You'd sue my mother? Over money that was going to come back anyway? I'm completely serious, just as you were serious when you decided to remake our entire lives without consulting me. Daniel's face hardened. This is extreme and unnecessary. If you'd just listen to reason— I've been listening, I interrupted. I've listened to your explanations, your justifications, and your plans for our future. Now I'm making my own plans. I gestured to the suitcases by the door. I haven't decided yet if I'm staying or going. But either way, things are changing. The money comes back. All of it. Tomorrow. And then we can discuss what happens next. And if I refuse? If I still want to take the position at Cascade? That's your choice to make, I said simply. Just as it's my choice whether to remain in a marriage with someone who's demonstrated such fundamental disrespect for our partnership. Daniel stared at me, seemingly at a loss for words. It was perhaps the first time in our relationship that he couldn't predict or manage my response. The realization appeared to unsettle him deeply. "Where would you even go?" he asked finally, glancing at the suitcases. "I have options," I replied. "That's the thing about being a financial advisor. I understand the importance of contingency planning." In truth, I'd already arranged a short-term rental through a colleague's vacation property. I had resources, support, and professional expertise in precisely the areas where Daniel had tried to outmaneuver me. "This is insane," Daniel muttered, pacing again. "All this drama over a financial decision." "No," I corrected him firmly. "All. This drama over a betrayal of trust. The money is just the tangible evidence." As I watched him process this, my phone buzzed with an incoming email. I glanced at it, a message from Claire with the subject line, "Demand letter, draft for review." Perfect. Timing. "I need to call my mother," Daniel said abruptly, pulling out his phone. "By all means." I gestured toward the bedroom. Privacy might be best for that conversation. He hesitated, then disappeared into our bedroom, closing the door behind him. I could hear his muffled voice, the tone urgent and agitated. While he spoke with Margaret, I reviewed Claire's draft letter. It was professional, precise, and left no room for misinterpretation. Return the funds by noon tomorrow or face legal consequences. I approved the draft with a quick reply, then waited for Daniel to emerge. When he did, his expression had shifted. From defiance to resignation. "Mom's transferring the money back tonight," he said flatly. "All of it." "Thank you. That's a start." "A start?" He looked exhausted suddenly, sinking into the armchair across from me. "What else do you want, Melissa?" "I want what I should have had all along: honesty, respect, and a voice in decisions that affect my life." Daniel rubbed his temples. "The Cascade offer expires tomorrow. I need to give them an answer. Then you need to decide what matters more, this opportunity or our marriage. Because I won't be managed, manipulated, or moved to Seattle without full participation in the decision. That's an ultimatum." "No, it's a boundary." "There's a difference." We sat in silence for several moments, the weight of 6 years together and 6 months of deception hanging between us. "I didn't set out to deceive you," Daniel said finally. "It evolved gradually. At first, I was just exploring the opportunity, not seriously considering it. Then, as it became more real, I kept thinking, I'll tell her soon, just after this next step. Before I knew it, I was in too deep." "And your mother encouraged this approach?" His slight wince confirmed my suspicion. "She thought you'd resist the Seattle move, said it would be easier to present it as a done deal." "Classic Margaret," I murmured. "I should have trusted you more," he admitted, meeting my eyes for the first time since the conversation began. I convinced myself I was protecting our future, but I was really just avoiding a difficult conversation. "Several difficult conversations," I corrected. "Yes." He looked down at his hands. "So what happens now?" I'd been asking myself the same question all day. The betrayal was significant, the breach of trust profound. Yet 6 years of partnership couldn't be dismissed entirely. Now we have the conversations you avoided. About Cascade, about Seattle, about what kind of marriage we actually want. No manipulation, no management, just honest dialogue between equals. And if we can't agree, then we'll know this partnership has run its course. Daniel nodded slowly, accepting the terms. The money will be back in our account by morning. All of it? I clarified. Every penny. I've already told Jim Harker I need another day to decide about the position. It wasn't resolution, but it was a beginning. The power dynamic had shifted permanently. Daniel's careful plans dismantled, his unilateral decision-making challenged. Whatever came next would be determined together, or not at all. My packed suitcases remained by the door. a visible reminder that I now had options too. By morning, the promised funds had indeed been returned to our joint account, $43,278.15, the exact amount that had disappeared. I verified the transaction before Daniel woke, feeling a small measure of relief amid the larger uncertainty. When Daniel emerged from the guest bedroom where he'd spent the night, he looked haggard, as though he'd barely slept. He poured coffee, in silence, then sat across from me at the kitchen table. "I spoke with Jim Harker again last night," he said finally. "Explained that I needed to reconsider some aspects of the offer. And he's extended the decision deadline by 3 days." Daniel took a deep breath. "I also told him I couldn't commit to the partnership buy-in at this time." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. How did he respond to that? Better than I expected. Said the position was still available without the partnership stake, though with adjusted compensation. Daniel met my eyes directly. "It would still be a significant increase from my current salary, just not the windfall I originally described." This admission, that the opportunity remained viable without risking our savings, only emphasized how unnecessary his deception had been. "We could have discussed this option from the beginning. My mother called this morning too," Daniel continued, his voice tightening. "She's not happy with how things have unfolded." "I imagine not," I replied neutrally. Her son's wife wasn't supposed to discover their plan until it was too late to object. Daniel winced. "She said some things about you that were unfair. I told her to stop." "You did?" This was unexpected. Daniel had always avoided confrontation with his mother. "I did." He looked down at his coffee. "I told her this situation was largely my fault, not yours. That you had every right to be angry about what we'd done." The "we" registered clearly, an acknowledgement of their joint conspiracy. "She didn't take it well," he continued. "Said I was throwing away a golden opportunity, that I'd always been too easily influenced." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Apparently, I'm a disappointment to the Thornton legacy, whatever that means." For the first time, I felt a flicker of sympathy. Daniel had been caught between his mother's manipulations and his own ambitions, making terrible choices in the process. It didn't excuse his actions, but it helped explain them. "What do you want, Daniel?" I asked softly. "Not what your mother wants for you, not what Jim Harker is offering, but what do you actually want?" He looked startled by the question, as though no one had asked him that in a very long time. "I want," he began, then stopped, gathering his thoughts. "I want success, recognition. I want to prove I can achieve something significant on my own merits." "And Seattle? The executive position? Is that what you want, or what you think you should want?" Daniel was silent for a long moment. "I don't know anymore," he admitted finally. "It all made perfect sense when I was planning it. Now I'm not sure." "Because I discovered the deception?" "Partly," he acknowledged. "But also because seeing your reaction, the packed bags, the changed locks, made me realize what I was risking, what I might lose." It wasn't an apology, not explicitly, but it was the first authentic thing he'd said since this crisis began. An admission of vulnerability, rather than a strategic communication. "I can't tell you what to decide about Cascade," I said, "but I can tell you that our marriage can't continue as it was. The partnership has to be real, or it doesn't exist at all." Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand that now, and I'm sorry, Melissa. Truly." The words hung between us, insufficient but necessary, a small first step toward whatever came next. 3 weeks later, I stood in our half-packed apartment, sorting kitchen items into keep and donate piles. So, much had changed in such a short time. Daniel had ultimately declined the executive position at Cascade Development, a decision that sparked a spectacular meltdown from Margaret and genuine surprise from Jim Harker. Instead, he'd accepted a lateral move to a smaller but more innovative firm in Portland, a position with less prestige but more creative control. It's what I actually want, he'd explained after making the decision. Not what I thought I should want. The crisis had forced both of us to reevaluate not just our marriage, but our individual priorities. For Daniel, that meant recognizing how his mother's expectations and his own status anxiety had driven him toward choices that compromised his integrity. For me, it meant acknowledging that I'd been too passive in our partnership, allowing Daniel to take the lead in too many aspects of our life together. We'd started couples counseling, a condition I'd insisted upon for continuing our marriage. The sessions were difficult, often uncomfortable, but necessary. We were learning to communicate honestly, to express needs directly, rather than through manipulation or acquiescence. The moving truck is confirmed for Saturday, Daniel said, entering the kitchen with another stack of empty boxes. The new place will be ready a day early. The new place, a modest but charming house in a developing neighborhood, smaller than what we'd originally planned but entirely ours, with no financial assistance from Margaret. We'd found it together, agreed on it together, and would move into it together as genuine partners. Our relationship with Margaret had shifted dramatically. After her initial fury subsided, she'd attempted to re-establish her influence through a series of manipulative gestures, offers of financial help that came with strings, invitations that felt like tests of Daniel's loyalty. We'd maintained firm boundaries, limiting contact, and making it clear that our decisions were our own. It hadn't been easy for Daniel. Years of conditioning had made him vulnerable to his mother's disappointment. But each time he chose our partnership, over her manipulation, he grew stronger, more confident in his own judgment. As for me, I'd learned that security isn't just about financial planning or risk management. True security comes from mutual respect, honest communication, and the courage to protect your own boundaries. My packed suitcases had remained by the door for a full week after our confrontation, a visible reminder that staying was now a choice. I was making actively, not passively. I found this while clearing out the office, Daniel said, handing me a small wooden box I hadn't seen in years. Inside was the card he'd given me on our first anniversary, with a handwritten promise to building a life together, step by step, dream by dream. We got off track somewhere, I said, running my finger over his younger self's handwriting. We did, he agreed. But we found our way back. Not all the way back. The trust that had been broken wouldn't be fully restored for a long time, if ever. But we were moving forward with clearer understanding and stronger boundaries. The deception had revealed fundamental flaws in our relationship, but addressing those flaws had created the possibility of something more authentic. As we continued packing the remnants of our old life, preparing for the new one we were choosing, together, I reflected on how close we'd come to losing everything, not because of an affair or financial ruin, but because of the slow erosion of partnership, the gradual replacement of collaboration with management and manipulation. The locks had been changed back weeks ago, but the message they'd conveyed remained. Respect and honesty weren't optional in our relationship. They were the foundation everything else would be built upon. One decision, one conversation, one day at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.